Today we're going to learn all about drawing vector graphics using Adobe Illustrator and how to create a custom pattern for a wall covering or textile. So here I am in Adobe Illustrator, and I have clicked the Create a New button to create a new file. And you can see that there actually are presets for things like letters, postcards, even iPhones and HGTV. These are when you're sizing graphics for a kind of known device. In our case, maybe a 12-inch by 12-inch box is probably good. Now, I've recently made one like that, but I'll show you how to set one up, which is basically you can tell Adobe to, first of all, use inches. That would be nice. That'll be a little easier for us. And then orientation obviously doesn't really matter for us. You'll also notice that there is something called artboards. These are kind of blank sheets of paper. You can have multiple sheets in your project, but let's just go with one for now and click Create. Now you might be saying, what do you mean vector graphics? What's that all about? What's the difference between graphics of, say, a picture? Well, a picture is what's called a raster graphic. And rasters are itty-bitty little pixels, basically, little dots. I'm going to zoom in on this comparison image here, and you can see here that in the raster image, things get a little dotty, a little pixelated. As you zoom in, the vector graphic remains much sharper. And the reason is because it's actually not dots. It's kind of little itty-bitty algorithms which describe each line, each curve, each fill pattern. And this is very powerful because it means that you can make this object any physical size you want without loss of fidelity. Let's talk about the user interface first of all. And this is the Windows version, of course. And what you'll see here on the left are tool buttons. You'll see pull down menus across the top, and of course a kind of panel on the side. This is very similar to really pretty much all of our graphics programs. One thing that most Adobe products have that's kind of nice is this workspace choice here on the upper right. You can choose for a workspace for basically all sorts of different applications. Now, I have the Essentials version. That's what comes up kind of by default. I'm going to choose the Essentials Classic version. And the reason I like this is because it has a lot of palettes that I pull up frequently as I'm drawing. For example, this is the swatches palette, and it has colors and what are called color groups, which is kind of matched color sets. It also has brushes. Click on that, or you can click over here on the brushes button. It just makes it a little easier to access some of these frequently used items. So you can obviously choose any which one that you prefer, but I like it this way, and I also like to have this kind of expanded menu. Now, those of you who want kind of a clean screen look with very few visible menus, you can call them up one by one just by going to the Window pull-down menu. And for example, that brushes menu, I can just choose brushes, and it pops right up. You can minimize it by just clicking the double arrows. Other things that you can do, your toolbars, you can go with the advanced toolbar, which is what comes up in this Essentials Classic view. Now I'm going to call up this image that I got off of the internet, and it's from freepik.com, and I'd just like to send out some kudos to someone named Picky Superstar, who allows us to use this image for free if we give them credit, and I'm giving them credit right here. And it's a great little vector graphic drawing, just so we can explore how the pieces of the drawing are put together. So here's the drawing in Illustrator. I'm just going to make it fit on my screen. Down on the lower left, you'll see there's a zoom button, and it has a number of preset zooms and just fit on screen, which makes it kind of take up whatever space is available. Now, to select different objects, you need to use one of the select tools. I believe that is the default tool which is activated when you open a new drawing, but if not, I'll just click on it here. It looks like an arrow. And you can click on different objects, and you'll even see kind of a smart cursor indication of what you're going to get when you click on these items. Now I'm going to click on these books, and you'll see how it has the little green dots indicating all these kind of different pieces, and then a bounding box which indicates the limits of the object selected. Now, like a lot of programs, you can click and drag on this object to move it around pretty easily. You can click and drag on other objects. You can see how things are kind of logically organized. There's a dog that's all grouped together. And you might say, well, what if I want to, I don't know, come in here and change the color of one of these books? You can double click on it, and you see how now I have sub-object of group of books. I can click on this, and I have a sub-object, which is just the individual book. And first of all, when I did that, a number of things happened. First of all, the properties of the object that I have selected show up kind of on the top and on the side. These are duplicate properties, but this top kind of properties bar has a few more kind of quick launch options. For example, if I wanted to change the basic, the stroke of the object, I could come in here and click on this down arrow and very quickly choose a different type of brush for the object. How often do you do that? Well, not very often, but I could easily do that in the properties menu on the side. The same options show up here just to let you know that they're duplicate. Also, the fill pattern. Every object almost every object in Illustrator is basically what they call a path, which is a series of anchor points that may or may not connect. If those anchor points enclose any sort of volume, even if they're not a continuous loop, they can have what's called a fill pattern. Now, right here on the properties menu, it has the fill option. I can click on that color, and I can choose another color. And you see how quickly you can change the fill color of the object. Also, every path has what's called a stroke. And the stroke is basically the color of the line. I can click on a different color, and you see I'll just click off of that so that you can see the effect. I've now changed the stroke to black. Now, how do I get out of this sort of deeply nested group here? Well, if you look up at the top, there's a little area here which says a kind of readout of the group nesting. So as you click on each group, it kind of cycles through the nested objects to go all the way back to where we're not selecting anything. So that's how you can change individual objects. Finally, zooming in and out is pretty easy, but it is slightly different than some of our architectural software. If you scroll up and down, you move up and down. So you can hold down Alt, that's the Alt button, which you can't see me doing because it's, you can't see my keyboard. But anyway, that in combination with the scroll wheel allows you to scroll. You can also do Control plus or Control minus. So there are a number of different kinds of tools. The main kind of groupings on the tools panel here, there's selection tools, which, you guessed it, allow you to select stuff that's already in the project. There are create tools or drawing tools, which allow you to create stuff, and then you can edit those things using modify tools. And of course, every tool or many tools have keyboard shortcuts, which will make your life a lot easier. Adobe Illustrator will give you a kind of tooltip to tell you what these different tools are. And there are, of course, help menus and that sort of thing. Let me just zoom in a little bit here, and you will see that there's a little tiny down arrow kind of next to the tool right at the bottom. If you click and drag on that, there are tools hiding under there. Let's take a look at the drawing tools first. We can't modify anything until we have something drawn. And there are the pen and the squiggly line pen are the basic ones. One is just called the pen tool. If you click on that tool, it will draw wherever you click, and it will draw straight segments. What are those line properties? Well, these lines are based on your current stroke, fill, and of course the opacity, which is how much you can see. Once you've drawn the object, it will be selected, and you can change its stroke just like that. Now, the curvature tool is very similar. You click, but what it will do is it will create anchor points, which are what are called Bezier points. And you can connect these objects maybe, or you can just have them draw and hit escape to finish. Now, both of these objects can be modified afterwards. If you just click on the selection tool, you can grab the object. You see there's kind of a bounding box. Those are not the anchor points for individual parts of the line, of the path. Instead, they are the anchor points that control kind of the overall shape. There's also like a rotate. As you re-stretch it, it will not keep the proportion unless you hold down Shift, in which case it locks the proportion. Now, how do we get those individual anchor points? We need the direct selection tool. With that, if I click on an object, you can see these anchor points are highlighted. I can click on one to activate it, and now I can move that anchor point individually. You'll also see there's an itty-bitty little dot there. If I click and drag on that dot, it will soften that anchor point. Now, a dirty little secret about both of these tools is that they can actually become the other tool pretty easily. Normally, when I'm drawing with the pen tool, it just draws segments. If I click and drag with the pen tool, it becomes the curvature tool. Same with the curvature tool. If I'm clicking along happily, drawing my Bezier anchor points, and then I hold down Alt, it will start to draw straight lines. And moving back to your original starting point will close this loop. When you're drawing, by the way, you can preset the fill that you're going to have. Just either click here where it says fill. Anyway, another kind of tool that's a little fun to use is the rectangle tool. You just click on the rectangle tool and it will draw a shape based on the current fill and stroke settings. And as with other tools, there are tools hiding under there, so we can draw ellipses and stars and other fun. And many tools, if you just double click on them, not all of them, but some of them, like the paintbrush tool, if you double click on it, there are some options. This is the paintbrush tool, and it can smooth your lines more or be more accurate. We've created all these lovely objects. What are we going to do with them? Let's start to modify them. And the simplest thing to do is use the eraser. Here's the eraser. And again, there's keyboard shortcuts. Most objects will behave in a similar manner. They will either break if you cross them with the eraser. Oops, except you have to select them first here. I'll just select them all. And if you use the eraser and you draw across a path that is not a kind of continuous loop, it will just break that path into smaller itty-bitty paths. If you break a path that is a continuous loop, it will kind of cut into that shape in a kind of very interesting way. Just double click on the eraser tool and change the size of that eraser, make it a little larger, and it can make a bigger kind of bite out of your shape. What happens when drawings overlap with each other? To move them around, you just select one, right-click on it, and here under Arrange, you can bring it forward or send it back. So if I send it to the back, you can see that it goes behind the object. Each object, if it does have anything less than 100% opacity, you will see the stuff kind of hiding behind it. There are also a number of tools which can be activated on a selected object or objects just by right-clicking on the object. And there's a whole menu here. The transform menu is the one that I find I use a lot. The move tool does exactly what you would think it would do. Click on move, and you can set an angle, X, Y, or Z. Be sure to click the preview button, and it will show you an outline of where the object was and where it's going. You can also click the copy button, and it will make a duplicate. If you then, after making a copy, hold down the control button and tap D for David, it will duplicate whatever you just did. So you can get a bunch of copies pretty quickly at exactly that same kind of offset dimension. What are the other options in this menu? Well, you can right-click here under Transform. There is Rotate. And again, you can choose an angle, you can make a copy, and all that kind of stuff. Okay. Now, if you want a little more robust rotate tool, there is a rotate tool here in the toolbar. It is, by the way, hiding a handy-dandy reflect tool, which is similar to rotate. Anyway, you can rotate when you use the rotate tool, you can modify the center point by just clicking and dragging on it, and then just grab the object and rotate it around that center point. Finally, if you want to make a copy of this little object that we've made, you can hold down the Alt button after you've moved that central rotation point, and you'll see it can make a nice copy. And then you can do your little Control D and kind of fan out the object that way. Is one called the gradient tool. I'll just go over here and click on it on the toolbar, and it will take a selected object. So I'm going to go over here and I'll just choose linear gradient, and you call it radial, and then freeform, which is just anything goes. Let's go back to the linear one so it's easier to describe. And what you'll see is a gradient kind of modification bar here in the middle, which you can drag different points of, and it will change the kind of locations of the different parts of the gradient, and you can change the colors. Right now, I guess it's just a black and white one, but you can go and make it red to black, for example. In fact, you can call up a whole gradients menu here, and you can control very subtly each of the different parts. There are so many different ones out there that are kind of ready-made too. There's a whole subtle gradients. One last fun tool to play around with is over here. It's called the width tool, and you can select kind of segments out of a stroke and modify how wide the line width is in those. You could, of course, select each segment and just grab it with the direct selection tool and then change the stroke of that individual piece. But this is a very quick way to kind of get some funky, I don't know, hand-drawn effects. Another editing tool which you might find handy is this free transform tool. And it's called the free transform tool because it doesn't cost anything to use. Well, I guess it actually does. First of all, here's a little menu which pops up, which has kind of a couple of different transform options. The icons kind of indicate what each one might do, kind of skew it or not. So the basic transform tool, it has these little handles with a kind of funky cursor, allows you to do any number of things, move and rotate, basically. If we come up with this perspective distort one, it will grab corners and kind of distort them in a perspectival manner. It'll grab opposite corners and kind of, I guess, axially, with axial symmetry, distort them. And then there's the kind of free distort, which is sort of anything can go. You can just grab corners and really distort a shape. One of my favorite tools, though, is kind of a multi-object tool. So let's say we have two different objects and we kind of want to make a progression from one shape to another. We can blend these shapes. Now, this brings us to the object menu, which is a very powerful menu. And you can see here there's all sorts of different options for things you can do to object or objects. But what we want to do is blend it. And let me just show you the blend options first of all. And there are so many different ways you can do it. You can just basically smooth them together. You can have a specified number of steps, or you can tell it make copies of each object a certain distance apart. I'm just going to go at a specified number of steps. 8 looks good to me. And now when I go to the object blend menu, I'll choose make. And you can see what it does is it kind of interpolates from one shape and color to an opposite shape and color. Another funky one that you can try is actually just in the context menu. If I just right-click on these two objects, they've been selected, and I choose average, and you can choose which axis to focus on or both. And what it will do is it will kind of try to come up with some interesting geometric combination of the two. How does it do that? I don't really know. But again, if you're trying to create certain sorts of shapes, you're not exactly sure which way you're going, some of these are just fun to play with to see what the program comes up with, what its kind of little algorithms hidden inside it do. There are one or two other effects that you can try as you're creating your objects. One of them that I happen to like is this distort and transform menu. And there are so many different options here. Pucker and bloat is one that's kind of fun. let's just preview what this is going to look like. And as you pucker the object, you're kind of distorting it. I'm not going to use that one though. Another one that's really fun is this whole warp menu, and I could basically spend all day using this warp menu. And let's try this one. This is the fisheye, and what this will do, it creates a kind of a fisheye effect, and this is really great for distorting objects in very particular ways. And again, you can use the sliders to get something that you like. Don't forget to use preview. There are a lot of different ones in here. So if you're drawing a simple shape and you want to try and get, oh, I don't know, a curve effect to it, you can really kind of bend an object. If I go to my appearance menu and I say, you know, that warp thing is too weird, I'm going to go back to normal. You can just turn it off and turn it back on again in this appearance menu. The other fun thing that you can change is what's called the brush. And I'll go over here to my little brushes menu, which looks like a cup with brushes in it. And the brush will change the stroke to be some other type of stroke. Normally, it's a solid line, which is to say it's the color and width that is contiguous across the length of the line. Well, just choosing a different line, different brush will very radically change the way a shape looks. And each of these brushes also has a stroke associated with it. So I can use this brush but have a much narrower stroke. I can even use brushes that are in fact very complicated line types built up from different colors, kind of layered together. And again, each type of brush is going to respond differently to the stroke dimension. Now, you might be saying, well, blah, blah, that's kind of not all that interesting. I want something more artistic. Well, let's go here and let's go to a paintbrush type of pen. And now, this is the library, by the way, of different strokes. And you can even download brushes onto your project. So I'm going to choose this very splattery kind of paintbrush and change its stroke down to be something a little smaller. And you can also download all sorts of brushes. For example, I have a hand-drawn brush here that I can use, and you just click on the line type and it will modify it. If you double click on it here in the brushes menu, you can start to really change some subtle effects. Once you get this deep into it, you're probably drawing an illustration as opposed to something which is more of a pattern. So what do you say we actually draw some kind of pattern now, some kind of textile? Now, I find that there are two kind of basic approaches. One is to start with a very detailed set of sketches, which is what I'm asking you all to do in your work, but some people prefer to just jump right in and start drawing. Each process is kind of very similar, but there are a couple things to consider. First of all, I think it's really important to have a sense of how big your pattern is going to be from the get-go. Is it 2 inches across or 6 inches across? Usually these things come in rolls of 34 or 36 inches, I believe. And so you'll want to get a sense of, like, across a yard, how frequently do you want your product to repeat? And what I like to do is draw in a rectangle as a reference, and you can with rectangles, you can click and draw and draw just sort of any dimension. But you can also just click once and you can come up with a point, which is the kind of intersection point of the rectangle, and you can specify a size. So, for example, 4 inches by 4 inches is the repeat that I'm going to go for. Okay, and let me get rid of this one. And you can make the stroke. Actually, I usually leave this in here and make it invisible. For now, I'm going to make the stroke no stroke. That's the upper left option here. Let me make these a little bit larger for you so that you can see these thumbnails. This one here is the none option. You can also, by the way, make the stroke none, but then when you click off of it, it disappears. For now, I'm going to make the stroke, we'll just make it a light gray line so that we have, so that we have something to refer to. The other thing you can do, if you have a drawing or sketch already created that you want to kind of go from, you can by all means drag that into your drawing. All you have to do is go to the File pull-down menu and choose Place. I think I'm going to choose one of the Maharam tile patterns here that I happen to like. Choose place. Now, in this case, I believe the pattern is already created with a repeat. So I can come in here and I can size it to my background image. Now, there are a number of tools that you can use to help yourself as you're drawing this pattern. A lot of these are things like grids and guides. Not everybody likes these things, but I sometimes like to have a grid visible, especially if I'm drawing kind of freehand. This grid does not print, but is awfully handy for laying things out. You can also turn on rulers if you have, again, a very specific dimension for different objects that you want to have. Now, then it's just a matter of drawing in the shapes that you think are going to work for this object. In this case, I'm just going to lower the opacity down of my background image. Now, how can I do that? I can't seem to select the darn thing. If you have objects kind of stacked directly on top of each other, you can just right-click on them, choose Select, and then Next Object, either above or below. I believe it's below it. And I'm going to lower the opacity down just so I am not too distracted by having that image in my way. And then you'll create the pattern using basic shapes that we've learned so far. There are a few handy-dandy tricks that I can tell you about, one of which is if you're drawing with your various objects and you just want to make a copy of one, select it, but then hold down the Alt key, and as your mouse goes over the edge of the path, you can click and drag, and you'll make a copy of that object, which is totally independent, and you can continue to draw. Okay. Now, another thing to consider is how are you going to make this a seamless pattern? Now, what we need here is for this shape to connect directly to this shape. We basically need these circles to match. Now, I could copy it over here, but I won't get an exact match unless I copy it an exact dimension. And this is where choosing that size, that 4" by 4" size, is really helpful, because now I can bring up my copy menu here. And then we can tell it to go an exact dimension, 4 inches, because we know that that's how far it should go. You see how it gives us a preview, and lo and behold, that actually matches the pattern directly. Finally, we'll just choose copy, and now we have exact copies on either end. One thing to be aware of with all these cool brushes and effects is that the process of creating a pattern within Illustrator will kind of not destroy them, but it turns them into individual strokes and fill patterns. So you will kind of lose the ability to modify them, turn them on and off. So when we create our pattern, we have to be sure to save the original geometry in case we want to come back to it at some point. So that begs the question, how do we make a lovely pattern out of this drawing that we've created? Well, use your select tool, select the objects in your pattern. For now, I'm going to leave that rectangle on in the background because I want to have it as a reference. At least I like to. It's just a habit. Anyway, then you just go to Object, Pattern, Make. It's really that simple. Now, what's cool about this is you can see your repeat pattern here on the screen. It's a little I don't know, disorienting right now because it's not really doing what we want, because we have to tell this pattern how big we want it to be. Again, this is why we use this reference rectangle. It's going to help me to place the pattern exactly right. Now, in this pattern editing mode, we can grab objects just like we were doing before. These are all the objects that we had before. And then I can just drag it down and orient it to the purple or blue boundary that indicates the limits of our pattern. That you can choose here are size the tile to the art. This will, in effect, make the tile as big as the art that you've drawn. It'll go to the limits of it, so we will lose all that repeat that we so carefully created. Choose how many copies you want to see. 3 by 3, 5 by 5. Depends on how far you're zoomed out on your screen. You can also dim those copies as much as you like. Now, I do want to hide that rectangle that I kept in there for reference. The way you can do that, I need to get at it, and sometimes it's hard with all these objects in the way. So I'm going to select all these other objects. I'm going to use a window, and anything that the window touches in Illustrator will get selected. And then I'm going to hide those objects. Just go to Object, Hide, Selection. And now I should be able to grab this rectangle, no problem. I'm going to leave the rectangle in there, but maybe I'll just make the stroke invisible. Finally, I'm going to go and unhide my objects. You just go to Object, Show All. And there we go. That's really all there is to it. Click Done to be done. Now, I want to see what this pattern looks like. So I'm going to draw a rectangle, and you can draw any shape, of course. But I am going to choose my pattern, which was created here, and there it is applied to an object. What you can do, just double-click on the pattern here in your Patterns menu. Use your Select tool to select the objects in your pattern. And now there is a Recolor Artwork option here. This is exactly what Illustrator is used for. It's going to be really easy to recolor this. Basically, you choose Recolor Artwork. You need to kind of lock the different colors to channels in this Recolor Artwork menu. So just go to the Edit menu, and there's a little lock button that links the harmony colors. Doesn't necessarily make them any more harmonic, but it does allow you to save them kind of as they're assigned to these different points. Now, I could come here and I could actually just modify the colors this way, keeping their exact relationship. And I can drag in or out to get tints and hues. I can also drag each of these separately if I want to kind of change their relationship. Now, if I do it this way and click OK, it has now changed my pattern. So I do not want to hit Done. What I want to do is save a copy. Okay? Choose Save a Copy, and I can call it, Brody 2. And I don't need to have it tell me this every time, so I'm going to say, stop telling me that, because I'm making a bunch of these. And again, I'm still here in this pattern edit mode, but now if you look in my swatches menu, you'll see two different ones, two different patterns, really very close. Let's close out of this menu here and go to our swatches menu. And you can see here there's these little folder icons. Oh, those are the same ones we saw in the Recolor Artwork option. So let's go here and we'll go to this library. These little books, though, that means library. And as we saw in the brushes menu, there are lots of different options. In fact, they are tended to be grouped based on theme. So, for example, if you want Russian poster art, what you'll see is there are a number of common color schemes associated with Russian poster art. And I'm just going to scroll through this menu using these different options here. There are so many different colors. In fact, color is really a super complicated subject. Anyway, if you have one that you like, here's a piñata, you can just drag it into your swatches menu. So Adobe provides a very nice online color tool. It's color.adobe.com/create. And you can log in using your Adobe account. Now, what's really nice, you can explore color themes that are already created by other folks and they've uploaded these to Behance and other websites. And you can, if you find one that you like, you can capture that and put it right into your project. You can find out what's hot and what's not, so to speak, by looking at these color themes. In fact, you can even take a photo and copy the colors out of that and add them into your whole library. Now I'm going to go to the Create palette, and I can choose, a color scheme that I really like. If I want to extract it from an image, I can go here and browse the image. When you use an image, and you can by all means use your physical sketch, you can even move the cursor to choose which colors are going to get kind of picked. And this is really handy when you are dealing with computer screens, which don't always render the colors the same way you intended. You may have spent a while on your hand-drawn, hand-colored sketch, and you really want those colors to match. This is probably the best way to do that. So I'll click Save. This is now in my library. When I go to my color wheel, it has that color loaded in, and I can make further modifications either by clicking and dragging, if I wanted to, or by modifying kind of the real deep CMYK or RGB levels of this drawing. Again, it can be quite difficult to get colors to match. Using this tool will help you do it. Finally, when you save it, it will be added to your library, and that library will show up back in Illustrator. So you'll find a link to your library. Of course, this means you have to be signed in to Adobe pretty much everywhere, online and in your application. I'll click this little, looks like a target, to get to my Adobe color themes. But you can choose my themes, and the one that you just created should show up. Here it is. I called it Maharam Riff. Add this to your swatches. And there it is. Let me select my objects again, go to Recolor Artwork, and then I can choose, say, this Maharam theme. And like magic, it kind of matches. Now, you might say, well, it doesn't quite match exactly. You can come and kind of randomly assign each of these color channels. You can kind of keep tapping these buttons so that it kind of scrolls through, because there are more colors. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 colors in this particular channel, until you get one that you like, or you can kind of poke at them individually. But once again, we don't want to wreck our original, so make sure that you save a copy. The last thing that we want to do is create image files of each of these patterns. We want to create an artboard that is the exact size of the pattern. I'm going to use the artboard tool here. If you just click, you can actually just draw them by drawing a box. You can make the box 4 inches by 4 inches. Now, the artboard tool is handy because whatever we put in this box, we can export it pretty easily, and we can copy it by holding down Alt. We can even make more than one copy by just grabbing 2 of them, holding down the Shift key. Anyway, now we have all these artboard copies. We can just load our pattern in, pretty straightforward. Just call up your swatches menu, and each of the patterns that we created, we can drag it into this menu. And because we have a little rectangle in the background, it's really easy to align it with the box. You can just do that with each one of these. You just drag it in. So now, how do we get an image file that we can upload to our printing platform? Well, pretty straightforward. Just go to File, Export, Export As. There are a number of file formats. JPEG, of course, is the most compressed. PNG, I find, has a nice balance between file size and compression lossiness. So I'm going to choose that. Obviously, you'll want to call it something like, check this Use Artboards button. What that will do is it will allow us to choose which artboards we're going to use. And what it will do, it will give you a save menu for each individual one. Now, I'm going to choose a medium pixel per inch dimension. 150 is fine. And the art optimized, which is what is the default option, is going to be best for us. Finally, you can choose a background color. If you are printing this on something where the material itself may shine through, I don't know, burlap comes to mind, you might go with a transparent background. Otherwise, when they print it, it will lay down white ink. And you may or may not want that. For a wall covering, you're going to want that if it's a paper wall covering, or vinyl. You don't want the natural vinyl, but for some fabrics, you may want a transparent color. Click OK. And there are your 4 exports. So it's time to get our fabric samples printed. I have gone to spoonflower.com and logged in. You'll want to create your own account. And let's go to your studio, which is really my studio. And I will go there. And let's see, there are some collections over here on the left where you can collect together multiple samples. This is handy if you're going to create what we're going to do, which is a sample pack, among other things. So let's create a new collection. I'm not going to allow this to be visible to the public. And now we can upload objects into your design. Click Upload Your Files and it will load them in. Here are my samples uploaded onto my library, and I can just choose which collection they're going to go into. Now when we go to Collections and we click on Muharram, we should see it right in there. Now pick your favorite one and you're going to make a full-size print of that. I'm just going to go to this one here. So in this menu, you can choose the type of fabric that you're going to use. The cheapest one, let's see, Petal Signature Cotton seems to be about the cheapest one you can get. But of course, you can print it onto anything you want. If you really like it, you can make some fleece out of it and sew yourself a jacket or, you know, a modern jersey or whatever, and 1 yard. And you can add that to your cart. Now, I would also love to be able to print some samples. You can print these back in the Art Center, but I'm going to have them print them onto a fabric. So I also want to order that sampler. To do that, I'm going to go to your studio, take a look at my collections. I'm going to follow the link here to my own collection, but I want to see this collection in my design library. That's where you can order a sampler. If you go up here, it's a button that you can click on. There's some information about it. 1 to 5 designs is $12, and it's kind of worth it if you really want to see what these are going to look like on fabric. So choose Get a Sampler. And again, you can choose the fabric that you think is most appropriate, but I'll choose this signature cotton and order a fabric sampler. And that's all there's to it. You just pay the money, and in a couple of weeks, they will ship off to you a lovely set of fabric samples.